Hello and welcome to La Excellence Hyderabad and Bengaluru. This is the daily news analysis for 25th May 2020. The notes for the daily discussion will be available in the description box. In addition to this, the link for the daily test will also be found in the description box. Please go through that link and attempt the test at 9:30 sharp so that you can have practice based on the discussion of this particular video. The online live general studies batch for 2021 for both prelims and mains has started. The admissions for the same have started. Please direct your queries to the numbers given below. As usual, the editorial articles will be discussed under DEEP or the Daily Editorial Enrichment Programme, and the rest of the important articles will be discussed under targeted news analysis. So the first article for our discussion has the title, The Need for a Million Worksites Now. The syllabus connection is listed here. Please have a look. The issue is related to the employment of the migrant workers and the dimension is regarding the expansion under the MGNREGA works. So what does this article essentially talk about? This article essentially talks about the crisis that is being faced by the migrant workers, be it in terms of income security or food security or the nutrition security. Further, it gives us certain points to solve these problems with the help of MGNREGA, and these points in fact can directly be put in your mains answer. So the difficulties that are being faced by the migrant workers in recent weeks is being cast on the television channels. So whatever television channels you open up, you will see that the problems faced by the migrant workers are the main featuring articles of these television channels. Everyone is talking about the migrants and the problems faced by them. Now the author goes forward and says that it has stirred the nation's conscience. Now please keep in mind such keywords like nation's conscience or maybe demographic dividend or maybe democratic deficit, etc. Whenever these key terms come up in the newspaper or wherever you read, please write them down so that you can reproduce them in your answer, because these keywords fetch high marks in the mains examination. So yes, the problems of the migrant workers is being talked about by everyone. Now the situation looks really bad, and in fact several surveys were conducted by universities like the Ajim Premji University and the other institutions. So these people were conducting surveys to understand the problems of migrant workers better. So what were the findings of these surveys? The surveys have found out that 74% of the migrants were consuming less food today than they used to consume before the lockdown. So 75%, nearly 3/4 of the migrants are consuming less food. And another survey which was conducted by Farzana Afridi in Delhi has found that 80% of the low-income neighborhoods have not earned even a single penny during the lockdown. Now this points out to the severe hunger and malnutrition that is being faced by the migrants right now, and not just the migrants but also the low-income poor people. These are all the people who are facing problems during the lockdown. Now because of no income, the situation is going to prevail even after the lockdown, because these people do not have any money, any disposable income in their hands. Now government as part of its responsibility has doubled the food ration to be given to the people. Now this is a good move because the public distribution system will be able to provide twice the amount of food grains which it used to provide to people in general. But the problem is the public distribution system leaves out about 500 million people, including many who live in poverty. Now this will accentuate or aggravate the hunger in certain sections of the society. So all those people who are excluded by the public distribution system will start facing problems. And we need to take steps to handle the hunger of everyone in the society at the moment. Now even for those people who are covered by the PDS, they will continue to receive food security in some form, but adequate nutrition cannot be ensured. We can only ensure rice, wheat and some protein to pulses, etc. and so on. But who is going to ensure the important minerals, vitamins and nutrients that are required for the human body? So that is another problem which people are going to face. So to cope up with the situation or to cope up with the crisis as such, poor households urgently need a chance to earn cash. strong hard cash in their hands is quite required. With this cash, they will be able to buy vegetables or fruits which are important for their nutrition, for the nutrition of their kids, their wives and their household. Okay, so for this the author says that NREGA or the MGNREGA offers an obvious alternative, at least for the rural areas. So we must rejuvenate our NREGA and provide without delay wages. Wages have to be provided from time to time. They have to be provided for time to time so that these people will have cash in their hands. However, there are some logistical problems in this. For example, most workers find it very difficult to submit their work applications for MGNREGA, and unfortunately, no one can be employed unless his or her name has been entered in advance in the work roles of MGNREGA. So you have to first register yourself for the work site for the whatever work that is going to occur. Only then you will be able to go and work. Now, because these people do not have adequate awareness to go and write out the application form and so on, there is still a problem of low employment in MGNREGA despite huge demand for employment. Which is to say that there is demand for employment, people want to work, but they do not know how to fill the application forms, the work application forms. So this is a problem that they are going to face. Now thus, as a solution, the worker must be allowed to enroll on the site of the work directly. So he should be allowed to go to the work site directly and enroll himself then and there immediately. Now the author calls for a large-scale opening of NREGA works in proactive basis. He also gives further recommendations to handle the crisis better. Now remember that you can directly put the following points in your mains answer. If the question is asking you to give recommendations to solve the problems of the rural migrants in particular or migrants in general, you can use these recommendations in your mains answer. So what are these recommendations which this particular editorial article gives? Firstly, every village needs at least one major work site where a good number of people can work at short notice. So a large work site is required. And the second point is large-scale employment generation should continue throughout the monsoon so that people will be able to have more disposable income in their hands. We also have to expand the list of permissible works under MGNREGA so that more workers can be hired. So what does this point mean? Currently under MGNREGA there are certain heads, there are certain components: integrated watershed development, you also have earthworks, you also have farm pond creation. So all these are basically parts of MGNREGA. We have to expand this list. We have to expand this list of permissible works so that we can obviously hire more workers under different works. Also, to create awareness among the workers, you have to mobilize volunteers so that work application can be simplified, so that people will be able to enroll themselves in the job list as soon as possible. Now, we also have to temporarily return to a cash payment of NREGA wages. This should be exercised during the crisis temporarily because this will ease the cash crisis in the rural households and it will make their purchases simple. And you have enough budget under MGNREGA. In fact, the budget under MGNREGA for 2020-21 has been raised to 1 lakh crore. So if you implement these recommendations of this particular article, then we can make sure that the migrants or the poor households of the rural people do not face problems as such. Now with these recommendations, this article concludes itself, as in this is the essence of this article, and you can easily write these recommendations as your mains answer on MGNREGA or disaster management during drought and so on. Now the form of the question might vary. But you can always use these points from this particular article to substantiate your answer. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is Hardly the 1991 Movement for Agriculture. The syllabus connection has been listed here. Please have a look. The issue is related to the reforms in the APMCs that have been launched in recent times and especially in the recent economic stimulus package that has been given. The dimension is related to the challenges involved in the functioning of the APMCs. So what does this article say? This article starts out by talking about the 1991 reforms. So we all know that the 1991 reforms in India were a landmark event which changed the face of how our economy functioned. So the reforms helped us move from a state-led model to a market-led model of growth, and the reforms that were undertaken were on various fronts. We took reforms in foreign exchange sector, we have taken reforms in the agricultural sector, or in banking, in taxation. Most parts of the economy were basically revamped by the 1991 reforms, right? So recently, as a part of the reforms package, recently as in the past 1 or 2 weeks when the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan has been launched. So as a part of the reforms package, post-corona, some important changes have been announced by the government in the arena of agricultural marketing. So you have to remember here that agricultural marketing includes every component that moves the agricultural produce from the farm to the market. So it involves the mandis, the APMC mandis, the logistical chains, the traders that are there, and so on. Everything else, all these things are basically included in agricultural marketing. And in this particular arena, reforms have been launched as a part of the reforms package. So in this particular sector, the government has called for sweeping reforms, and this announcement of reforms in agriculture has been hailed by some, as in some people are basically calling it as the 1991 movement for agriculture. That is because people are seeing that these reforms as a part of ABA or Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan in relation to agricultural marketing are going to provide a strong push to the agricultural marketing, food processing, and so on. Now, what are the components under the recent reforms? So the recent reforms basically focus on 3 areas. Firstly, the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee or the APMC Act. The second thing it focuses on is the Essential Commodities Act, and thirdly, it focuses on contract farming. Now, this article doesn't talk about these reforms in detail. It basically talks about APMCs only and how the APMC reforms have caused certain impacts in agriculture, right? So now to understand why reforms were necessary in the Agricultural Price Marketing Committee Act or the APMC Act, we need to understand certain problems in the APMCs. So APMCs were the places where farmers used to sell their produce. So there used to be a designated mandi under the APMC Act. The farmer goes there and sells his produce. Because of political interference and because of a long chain of intermediaries and so on, these mandis used to oppress the farmers by giving them very less prices. Farmer goes there to give his produce and get some cash, right? But the cash he gets is very less because that is the price they give. The agricultural mandis basically give very less prices to the produce of the farmer. Now these problems became more aggravated in the case of large mandis, because in large mandis they used to specialize in commercial crops and fruits and vegetables, so the production used to be regionally concentrated. So in such large markets, the farmers were forced to sell their produce at a very low price, and they didn't have a choice either, because they didn't have the choice to sell anywhere else because it was prohibited by the APMC Act. Because the APMC Act said that you have to go and sell your produce in that particular mandi, right? So the whole state was divided into several regions or several pockets, and people in a particular pocket can go and sell their produce in the mandi of that pocket itself. So the farmer didn't have much choice. Neither could they take the produce home. See, if you're not giving me the good price, what will I do? I'll probably sell it somewhere else. But that is prohibited by the APMC Act. So in worst case, I'm going to take it back home and store it for some time and then come back and give you when there is good price for my produce. But that is also not possible because the storage capacity of the farmers was very less. So because of these several problems that are there in APMCs, the farmers used to be oppressed a lot. So the governments from time to time have tried to reform the APMC Act to make it beneficial for the farmer. Now even before the present reforms as a part of ABA or Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, we have gone through several reforms of APMCs. In fact, the first comprehensive model act on APMC, if you remember, was proposed during 2003. Yes, during 2003 itself, we came up with a model APMC Act to reform the APMCs as such. And since then, several efforts have been taken by the central government and also the state governments to push for reforms in the APMC mandis. In fact, as many as 17 states have amended their APMC Act to make it more farmer friendly, to ensure that the farmer has good money in his hands for his produce and so on. Now comes the important part of the article. This article now talks about the impact of the reforms in APMC. So we basically wanted to come up with reforms so that farmers will have more disposable income, so that there is more liberalization and there is farmer friendliness in the market. But the reforms as such have had certain negative impact, and you can use these points to tell the examiner about the persistent problems in the APMC marketing despite the several reforms that have been taken. So what are the persistent problems we still have even after the reforms have been launched? So the APMC reforms were supposed to bring in private investment in the marketing infrastructure. So in cold storages or warehouses, in logistics, etc., there is supposed to be private investment as per the reforms. And secondly, it was also supposed to provide more choices to the farmer to sell. That is, if the farmer doesn't like the price that is being given by a particular mandi, he can go somewhere else and sell his produce, and by doing so he will be able to sell his produce at a place where he gets the maximum price. This is what we call as price discovery, and this was also enabled by the APMC Act. But this happened only in theory, and unfortunately the farmers continued to be oppressed. And in fact, in states like Bihar, if you go and see, no investment at all came up in building the marketing infrastructure because of the new APMC Act. And the sad part was, by repealing the old APMC, we have led to a loss of revenue and to an utter deterioration of existing infrastructure. So this is basically a catch-22 situation. You have caused certain reforms, and those reforms have not yielded possible benefit. And you have repealed the previous law, and because of that the existing infrastructure is deteriorating, and this is such a sad situation for the APMCs. Now the revenue collected from the APMCs before the reforms used to be used for modernization of the market yards, and also for the laying of roads and the construction of other infrastructure in the vicinity to provide farmers better access to the markets. But after the repeal of the old APMCs Act, there have been no such moves, and even this kind of infrastructure started deteriorating. Now the question is, we want to bring in reforms in the APMCs, but will these reforms actually help the farmer? Well, there is no evidence as such that the farmers have received better prices in private mandis outside the APMCs. Also, there have been instances of collusion and corruption in the running of the APMCs even under the new Act. Now, if you look at the tone of this article is basically taking an anti-reform stance. So we have to take this article with a pinch of salt. In such articles, we have to grasp everything that can be used in our mains answer writing, but as such we don't have to take this article seriously, because it is saying that the reforms are creating totally negative impact. Like for example, if the question is on the successes of APMC reforms, you can talk about all the positives of the same, and then you can write some criticisms of the APMC reforms, and these criticisms you can draw from this particular article. And as such, you cannot be very negative about the reforms. You have to keep that in mind, and you have to use some lines like, though the reforms are well intended, there are still many bottlenecks and we have to address them at the earliest. This is the kind of moderation you have to do in your mains answer. Then the article moves forward and says that the reforms in agriculture will not solve all the problems of rural farmers automatically because of the above reasons, as in because of the problems given above. Now, moreover, there is a demand crunch in the economy because people do not have any money in their hands. Like for example, you are basically reforming what? The agricultural marketing mandis, you are reforming the contract farming and so on. All this will probably lead to a higher produce. But even if it leads to a higher production, who is going to buy this produce? People do not have money to buy this produce. So no amount of marketing reforms will lead to a higher price realization if the macroeconomic conditions are poor. That is, if the people in general do not have enough income in their hands, even if we have enough produce in the economy, we will not be able to go and buy the produce. So if the government is serious about providing remunerative prices to farmers, the first thing it has to do is to basically create demand in the economy, for which it has to go for fiscal stimulus. So that is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is Failing to Perform as a Constitutional Court. The syllabus is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to migrant workers and the dimension is the role of the judiciary in ensuring the rights of migrant workers. So what does the article say? This article says the following things. Like for example, India along with the rest of the world is facing the public health crisis at the moment. And what is this health crisis? This is COVID-19, of course. In this crisis, several new and unique challenges have come into focus. The most acute problem or the challenge as such is the challenge of the migrant laborers. These migrant laborers have faced a lot of problems. They have faced food crisis. They were stranded on the roads in this intense summer. Their young children are facing nutritional insecurity and so on. And the women are facing sanitation problems and other troubles. Looking at all these problems and the troubles of these migrant workers, we can immediately say that this is a violation of something. What is it a violation of? This is a violation of the dignity of life. This is a violation of their fundamental right to life, which would allow for a dignified life. And who is supposed to protect this dignity of life? The Supreme Court is supposed to do so, right? So the Supreme Court has failed to acknowledge that the fundamental rights of the migrant laborers have been violated. This is what this article says. Instead of taking petitions regarding this particular situation, the Supreme Court has refused to admit these petitions, or it has adjourned these petitions which were related to the problems of the migrant workers. And this is not good in a democracy where the Supreme Court is supposed to protect the rights of the people. Now here the court seems to be denying the most fundamental right of access to justice by not admitting or not allowing these petitions to be admissible. And by doing so, it is letting down a lot of people, especially the migrant workers, and it is failing to perform as a constitutional court. That is what this article essentially points out. So the article moves forward and tells us that there are several other examples in which the Supreme Court in the past has laid out policies. As in the past, the Supreme Court has done well. For example, if you look at the Vishaka guidelines, the court has said it has given certain guidelines to prevent sexual harassment at workplace. And if you also look at the Supreme Court's judgment in relation to environmental protection, Supreme Court's judgment in relation to right to food, it has given certain beautiful guidelines to make sure that the fundamental rights of the people are protected. But in this case of migrant workers, why is the Supreme Court not doing so? That is what this article is questioning. Why is the Supreme Court ignoring the plight of the workers? In fact, the Supreme Court is not just rejecting the petitions that are being placed in front of it. It is also actively dissuading or preventing the people from putting these petitions, from approaching the court for the redress. And this is not a good thing in the democracy, and the Supreme Court, it's high time that the apex court must intervene and monitor the problems in this particular case to provide the dignity of life to the workers. This is what this article says. And this can be used to give a constitutional angle or a judicial angle to the problems of migrant workers. If the question is on migrant workers and the solutions to solve the problems of migrant workers, you can use this constitutional angle that it is a violation of the fundamental right to life and that the Supreme Court has to intervene to solve this particular problem. Otherwise, it will fail as a constitutional court. But of course, you cannot use extreme language. You have to moderate your statements so that it will look soothing to the examiner. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the present article is For Farms and Farmers. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the farm sector and the dimension is related to the Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyay Yojana. So this is a Yojana that has been launched by the Chhattisgarh government. We will see what this article is telling us. So what does this article say? So we have the Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyay Yojana and it was launched in the Chhattisgarh. So this Yojana particularly provides income support to the farmers of about 10,000 to 13,000 per acre through direct cash transfers. If it is a normal crop, 10,000 will be given. If it is a cash crop like sugarcane, 13,000 per acre will be given. So in addition to these measures, we already have certain measures like the minimum support prices for farmers to provide with income support. But the problem is the efficiency of the MSPs is not high. And this is for forcing the farmers to sell their produce at a very small at a very small price or a throwaway price. So because the efficiency of the MSP scheme is less, we are basically coming up with several other income support schemes, of which this Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyaya Yojana is one of them. So by providing money per acre, the government is trying to ensure incomes for the people or the farmers as such. But one might ask, this is going to ensure only income for all those people who have land. But most of the farmers are who? These are the farmers who are tenants, sharecroppers and the landless laborers, right? So what about these landless laborers and tenants? Nothing to worry. The state is also designing a cash transfer scheme for a landless laborer. So, but if you look at the measures that are being taken, this article says that these kind of interventions, these kind of income support schemes like Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyaya Yojana or whatever Yojana which tries to provide income support to landless labor, tenant and so on, these do not solve the underlying problem of agriculture. The underlying problem of agriculture is that farming is non-remunerative, as in farming does not provide enough profits for the person who invests himself in the farming, in the activity of farming. So there are a lot of problems with farming at a fundamental level and we are not addressing them, is what this article points out. So here this writer basically tells us the problems of farming, the problems which are faced by agriculture one by one, and these can be used in your GS3 answers where you would be asked to write about the problems in agriculture or the problems in farming. In such cases you can basically use these points to write your answer. So some of the problems which have been mentioned by the writer are, firstly you have messy land records, as in the land records do not clearly show which land belongs to whom. This is one problem with agriculture. The second problem is that there is unscientific and unsustainable crop patterns. What does this mean? You plant sugarcane in areas where there is less water, and this is not sustainable because sugarcane is a water guzzling crop, and you plant rice in areas which basically face drought, and this is also not sustainable because rice requires a lot of water, and this kind of unscientific and unsustainable crop pattern is hurting the economy, as in hurting the agriculture. In addition to this, we have several other problems like the exploitation by APMC mandis, the inadequacy of irrigation, the poor adoption of technology, or the conflict with wildlife. So these are all the problems that have been pointed out by this particular writer. And so the article essentially, what does it tell us and how is it relevant for our exam? This article essentially tells us that income support schemes like Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyaya Yojana, etc., they serve a purpose, but it is not the panacea for everything. We need to address all the other problems, all the structural problems in agriculture, so that farming becomes remunerative and the farmer wants to come and work in agriculture, right? So this is what the gist of the article is. This article is important for our exam because it points out the problems in agriculture which can be written in the mains exam, and you can also talk about the inadequacy of these stopgap reforms. So these knee-jerk reforms like these yojanas are helpful in the short run, but in the long run you have to come up with structural reforms. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is US pushing relations to the brink of a new Cold War, says China. So the syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to US-China relations, and the dimension is related to the blaming of China by USA over the corona and other aspects. So this article, what does it say? It basically talks about the degradation of relations between China and the United States because of various reasons, of course. So this can be used in your GS2 international relations answers to write about the possibility of a new type of Cold War between China and USA. And even in GS1, if the question is about Cold War, you can talk about the Cold War situation between United States and the USSR formerly, and how it is evolving in recent times to a tussle between United States and China, which is something like a neo-Cold War. So this is how you can use this article, extract inputs from this article to write your mains answer. So USA is basically blaming China over its weak initial response in handling the coronavirus. In addition to this, the recent Chinese security law, which basically curtails the rights of the people in Hong Kong, this is also being criticized by the United States. So in addition to these two problems of coronavirus and the Hong Kong security law, there are also issues of trade issues between the United States and the China, and there are also issues of human rights between United States and China, and this is pushing the relations between these two countries towards a new Cold War. So we have seen various angles from which the United States is trying to blame China. Now we will see what China's response is towards these US actions. So China says that the Trump administration is using deviation tactics. So the Trump administration is not able to cover up its failures in handling of coronavirus. So it is projecting an external threat. It is projecting an external cause of this coronavirus, which is China. So China says Trump is blaming China for his own failure. As we all know, United States of America has the largest number of corona cases, and it has utterly failed. It has utterly failed at preventing the deaths of its citizens, in order to cover it up, United States is basically blaming China, is what China feels. Now everyone is talking about carrying out an investigation regarding the origin of coronavirus, and the different countries that are supporting them include nearly 60 to 70 countries of the world, and these countries are indirectly implying that they want to investigate China. They are on the surface, they are saying that we want to investigate the source of coronavirus, the origin of coronavirus and so on, but they in fact want to investigate China, and they want to know if China has deliberately launched this virus. Now in this context also China has passed out certain comments. China has said that the global institutions are allowed to go for a scientific investigation, but they have to do it without any presumptions. You're welcome to do your investigations. We will be more than willing to help you all, but these investigations shouldn't be politically motivated. This is what this article says, as in this is what China is saying. And in relation to the Hong Kong security law, what does China say? So in relation to the security law in Hong Kong, China is arguing that the law is very necessary to protect the national security, and this national security is being endangered because of the violent and misguided protests in Hong Kong. To prevent such situation, to prevent a recurrence of such situation, we had to come up with this security law. So this is how China is defending itself. So this ball by ball commentary, not so much relevant for the exam, but the possibility of a new Cold War, the reasons for a new Cold War is important for our mains examination. The title for the next article is Debt Mutual Funds to Carry Risk. The syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to debt mutual funds, and the dimension is related to the basic understanding of debt mutual funds. Okay. So what are these debt mutual funds? So let us take any mutual fund. Take one sample mutual fund. This mutual fund invests in debt papers, and it generates returns by earning interest income. Now this might look complicated. We will simplify it. So this particular mutual fund invests in bonds. We all know what bonds are. So these bonds are examples of debt papers, and they will generate interest income, right? So bonds are basically loans. So bonds basically earn some interest income. Like for example, I am a person, I invest in a bond, then I get some interest income every month, and after a particular period of time I get the principal value of that particular bond. So a bond is a situation in which I am loaning out some money to that particular person or entity or firm. So this is a kind of debt paper. So bond is basically a debt paper, and whatever mutual fund invests only in these debt papers, that is called as a debt mutual fund. This we've understood. Now we'll move forward. So these mutual funds, as in the debt mutual funds, they don't just invest in bonds, they also invest in all other kinds of debt papers, like the government security, which is also a debt paper. You also have certificates of deposits and so on. So these are all the debt papers in which these debt mutual funds invest. But of course they won't invest in shares, because shares are basically equity. They are not debt papers but equity papers. So you have to keep that in mind. So a debt mutual fund invests in all the debt papers like the certificates of deposits, bonds, government securities, but it does not invest in shares. Now the basic difference between debt and equity is that the debt is like a loan which you give to someone and you earn interest on the same. Equity, on the other hand, Equity, on the other hand, is like investing in something and you get returns out of it. Now we will move forward and see if these debt schemes are really popular. Why is everybody talking about debt mutual funds at the moment? So if you look at the mutual funds industry at the moment, the debt funds occupy nearly 65 to 70% of the funds of the mutual funds. So we can say that these are relatively popular. Now we have to understand why this is the case. The first reason why debt papers are relatively popular is because they provide higher returns in comparison to the equity schemes. So because these provide higher returns, the mutual funds invest more in debt papers, which is why most of the funds of the mutual funds are invested in the debt papers. Also, it is not just about the higher returns, okay, they are also more safe. And why is this? Because if you invest in equity, if you invest in shares or a stake in a particular firm and that company makes losses, you will also make loss because you have invested in that company. You have not given any loan to the company. But as opposed to that, if you give loan to a company, even if that company goes bankrupt, even if it makes losses, it has to pay your debt, right? So this is why debt is more safe compared to the equity. Now this article explores the debt schemes further. It says that the debt schemes are not completely safe. This article says we have just learned what we have learned, that the debt schemes are relatively safer compared to the equity schemes. This article moves forward and explores the debt schemes, and it says that these debt schemes are not completely foolproof either. And the example it quotes is the recent example of the Franklin Templeton, right? So in this Franklin Templeton issue, you will, if you observe, this is basically a debt crisis. So this article basically gives a way forward. It tells us that even if you invest in debt papers, don't be so sure that you will not face any losses. So you should understand the debt instrument in which you are investing them. So you have to invest only in those debt instruments which are A rated, which are highly rated by rating agencies, so that you can cut your losses, so that you can earn maximum profit at minimum losses. That is what this article says. Now let's move on. So the title for the last article of our discussion is Seal LG Polymers Plant, says the High Court. The syllabus connection is listed here. Please have a look. The issue is related to Visakhapatnam gas leaks, and the dimension is related to the judicial inquiry into the gas leaks. So Visakhapatnam gas leaks have been in the national news for quite some time, especially in the past 2 weeks, because of the lot of damage that has been caused. As a response to this, the Andhra Pradesh High Court has given certain measures. You can use these points in your GS3 paper, where you talk about disaster and disaster management. How do you solve this particular disaster or industrial disaster? You can say that these are the measures based on your GS3 knowledge. In addition to this, you can also talk about the judicial inquiry, which this particular article talks about. And where else can you use this particular article? You can also use this article in your GS4, right? You can use this article in your GS4, especially in the case studies. Case studies basically ask you what, they give you a certain scenario, they ask you about the steps that you are going to take. In such a situation also you can use these points. So what does this article tell us? Andhra Pradesh High Court has directed the authorities to basically seal the LG Polymers plant. First thing, because this LG Polymers plant is basically what has released the styrene gas, and this styrene gas has caused a lot of trouble for people. So the High Court has asked the government to seal this LG Polymers. First thing, it also prohibited people, and including the company directors, from entering the premises of the LG Polymers. So that is a no-go area. However, it allowed certain committees, it also allowed certain panels which have been constituted by the National Green Tribunal or by the central and the state governments to investigate the gas leaks. So at the moment, the only people who are allowed to go into this styrene gas plant are those people who are investigating the gas leak, right? And in addition to this, the court has directed the authorities to stop the passports, to seize the passports of all those people or company officials who are wanting to move out of the country without permission. So these people will not be allowed to move out until and unless the investigation is complete. This is very important, because once these people or the company directors go out, they won't easily come back, and we have to go through the process of extradition, etc., negotiation and so on to get these people back. So you are not supposed to allow these people from going out of the country. This is an important point in your GS4. This is how you have to address the issue if you are a district collector in that particular Visakhapatnam area. And in addition to this, it has questioned the Union Environmental Ministry for the lack of valid environmental clearances. As in, why have you given environmental clearance for this particular industry when you have so many educational institutions in the vicinity? You have railway station in the vicinity. You also have airport in the vicinity. When you have all these entities in the vicinity of this LG Polymers plant, how did you even give the environmental clearance? Why did you even give the environmental clearance? That is what has been questioned by the court. Also, the court has raised certain concerns about flouting of certain rules. So there are certain rules which have to be followed as per the hazardous chemicals rules of 1989, manufacturing, storage and the import of hazardous chemicals rules 1989. So there are certain rules that have to be followed, and these rules have not been followed by LG Polymers, and the High Court, as in the Andhra Pradesh High Court, also pointed this out. So this is the end of the discussion. I'll meet you all again. I want you all to write the daily test by looking at the link in the description box. Go there. Every day you have a test at 9:30 p.m. on daily current affairs. Please attempt the test. Thank you.